So this guy drinks the most Starbucks I know. And he's all over the place. I mean, I see his posts on Facebook where, well, I just finished up a meeting. I'm heading towards another meeting. And in between that, I'll be doing a meeting and zooming in my car and the way you get the idea. This guy does a lot of service, and I really appreciate him coming here and being with us today. So I'm going to shut up. And Wayne, take over. It's all yours, sir.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm Wayne Butler. I'm an alcoholic. Good to be here. Grateful to be sober. Love AA. I sure appreciate the invite, Glenn, and I'm glad Jane said hello. I want to thank my posse for showing up on late notice. Apparently, I neglected to send it out. I love my posse showing up. Makes me feel relevant, and it feeds my ego a little bit. I don't mind that at all. You know, it's like the world deflates my ego, so I got to kind of fix a flat in my car. You know, you just kind of pump it up. But I love those guys. I know they love me, and that's kind of a cool thing. When I got here, I was dead. My soul was dead. I had no feelings for other people. The only person I was concerned about was me. And I want to give a shout out to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it had not been for that single book and the information it carries in that book, and the supplement, the 12 and 12, for its further information to help diagnose me, so that I can make a self-diagnosis. Because as you know, I've been diagnosed many times, Glenn, and they had the right guy apparently. And I want to share that. I'm going to become an alcoholic really fast, because when I tell my story, a lot of people have contacted me and they've gotten confused, and they really think I'm a mental case. Because my story sounds like I was, and to the untrained eye, a lot of people in AA didn't believe I was alcoholic either. I mean, they just didn't believe it. The people in my hometown knew of me. They heard of me. I was on the news several times. I was locked up in an institution called the Watertown Insane Asylum. That's not New York. That's Watertown, Illinois. It was where they housed the criminally insane. That's where the worst of the worst got sent. I was in there 14 times. I have to admit, 4 times was self sign-in, because that's where my girlfriend lived. She was something special. She had murdered her family, and she was committed. She never did get out of there. But she has so many personalities. She was like dating a different person every time I went there. And so, you know, it's like there might be some validity to what the people in AA and outside AA were saying of me. But very seldom was I called alcoholic. All I drank was beer. I drank alone a lot, although I was a barroom drinker. I loved Budweiser. I love Budweiser sometimes more than life itself. I watched the Super Bowl halftime show. Don't much care about the football game, but I want to see if the Anheuser-Busch wins again, because they seem to win the commercials an awful lot. Now that you could call that's an unusual reaction to alcohol. Not even drinking it, just being obsessed with the idea of something that I can't make sense out of. I don't understand. I don't know why I have the dilemma I have with alcohol. I don't understand this disease concept thing. I'm really confused. And so let me start out by here's what makes me alcoholic. It's almost too simple, Glenn. I almost missed it, mainly because it's in a chapter I wasn't going to read. Chapter 4, We Agnostics. And the reason I wasn't going to read chapter 4, because I considered myself a Christian, and I didn't want God to think I didn't believe in him and commit blasphemy, so I refused to read the chapter We Agnostics. I finally acquiesced at my sponsor's constant nagging at me. I finally acquiesced and read it. And I have to tell you something. I'm glad he nagged me relentlessly, because I found myself in the very first paragraph. And I'm going to go to the third sentence, and I'm going to put it in the first person. It's on page 44 if you're reading along. It says, if, when I honestly want to, do I find I cannot quit drinking entirely. Now, I've inserted the word drinking, I suppose, because the author assumes I'm going to know this is about alcohol, since it is titled Alcoholics Anonymous. So it says, if when you honestly want to, do I find I cannot quit drinking entirely? Man, I've lied to everybody. Lied to my wife, lied to the Navy, lied to everybody, saying I can quit anytime, I just don't want to. And but you know, when I'm looking at that man in the mirror, Glenn, I can lie to myself and I can delude myself, but when it comes to that, I knew I knew I could not quit drinking entirely, and I didn't know why. I didn't understand it. I have some knowledge that almost killed me. It didn't mean to. The knowledge itself didn't kill me. My reaction to it almost did. But the idea that I know for a scientific fact, ethanol alcohol is not addictive by nature. Now, I don't know why that's a controversy. It's a scientific fact. 34 out of 35 people can drink alcohol safely. If it was addictive, if it was an addictive drug, 34 out of 35 could not drink it safely. Now, I know that. So that's the baffling feature of alcohol to me, is my utter inability to leave it alone, even when I know I should. I just can't do it. And so rather than admit that I can't quit drinking, what I did was I picked up the mantra of I don't want to quit. And so when I came into AA, I had no desire to quit drinking whatsoever, although deep down inside, I thought I was lost for life because I knew there's no way that I could quit drinking. And I just didn't understand that. You know, Bill writes in How It Works, he says, alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. See, that was a baffling feature for me, that I could take a drink or two, I'd want to stop, but I would be compelled to keep drinking. And I did not understand that until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, got this book called Alcoholics Anonymous, got the guidance of a sponsor and the help of many friends in AA to understand what that really means. And number two is, or if when drinking, do I have little control of the amount I take? That's another truth. I just know that I can't control the amount I take. You know, the book talks about the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is to drink like normal drinkers and to control and enjoy my drinking. And I can do neither of those things on my own accord. And that just baffled me, folks. It was a question. I used to look at my Budweiser bottle at Larry's Oasis and know I couldn't control it and didn't know why. It just, I guess you could call that powerlessness. I guess you could call that just absolute powerlessness, to know that once I take that first drink, I don't know what's going to happen. And to know that if I want to quit, I can't. That is a level of powerlessness that I couldn't even comprehend in my own mind. I needed the help of a sponsor and many speakers in AA that carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous with depth and weight, who carried a true message of Alcoholics Anonymous without watering it down with a lot of non-AA stuff that doesn't pertain to what we do here at all. And so I'm real grateful for those guys. But then it goes on to say, you are probably alcoholic. I went like this. That was close. Probably alcoholic. That gave me a lot of room to die, folks. You know, in my 45 years and 49 days of sobriety, one day at a time, I've seen a lot of us come and go. For whatever reason, I don't want to get into the weeds on that today, but for whatever reason, and they just don't seem to stick and stay. I could not accept the tenets of this book on face value, just because someone thought it was a good idea. I didn't want to be an alcoholic beside that, and I didn't know, you know, that powerful aspect of alcohol in that statement, alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. The powerful effect of alcohol, turns out Dr. Silsworth got it right when he said abnormal drinkers like me drink essentially because I like the effect produced. You know, I know the science of alcohol. Ethanol alcohol is only supposed to do one thing, and that's depress you. It's a central nervous system depressant. I don't know about you guys, but when I drank, it didn't seem to depress me. As a matter of fact, I got excited. I got good looking. I mean, I got really smart too. I don't know how that happened. I was born with my eyeballs locked inward, Daphne. My eyeballs were locked inward. All I could see was me, and the world around me scared me to death. But when I took a few drinks of Budweiser, somehow them eyeballs got unlocked and turned outward, and I saw a world that horrified me, that terrified me. But the more I drank, the better looking the world got too. And it's like, unlike the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, I'm more of a Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll type. I seem to have been born extremely self-centered, extremely afraid of everything, feeling like I don't fit in, don't belong, not a part of. And I had these terrible mind and emotions that I couldn't comprehend and that science couldn't figure out either. They tried. You know, and so the powerful aspect of alcohol is when I take a few drinks, something happens to Wayne Butler. He goes from being absolutely self-centered in his mind to where I've got an interest in other people, especially if they're blonde and blue-eyed and they wear a dress. I just want to add that part. And it's like I didn't know this until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and heard the music of depth and weight as people shared their stories. And you know, I was raised, and it says probably alcoholic. And I wanted to say that in all those cases that people come and go and come and go. I realized one thing they had in common. They didn't get from probably to definitely. Probably alcoholic. I can say I can admit in step one, admitted I was powerless over alcohol, but I have to accept that it's to have any validity in my life, to have any weight in my life. I need to find a way to accept the fact that I'm powerless over alcohol. And once again, Dr. Silkworth to the rescue. He said abnormal drinkers like these cannot drink alcohol in any amount at all, in any form at all. And by the way, drugs is not a form of alcohol. It's a form of drugs. Alcohol has many forms that it comes in, like what was that stuff my mom used for baking? I can't remember the name, but I bet some of you know what it is, though. It comes in them little bottles. It's almost pure alcohol. Vanilla extract. That's what it is. You know, that's got a shot of alcohol in it if you want it. You know, NyQuil. Oh my goodness. You go into a drugstore and just drink cough syrup right off the shelf if you want to. I didn't understand that was all part of this illness. I didn't understand that was all part of my problem. But you know, being this kid that didn't know what's wrong with him, needed help, didn't understand what help he needed, had this mind, let's call it an ismatic mind, ISM, internal spiritual maladjustment. I had no idea I had an internal spiritual maladjustment. I had no idea that showed up in 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I had no idea that ism shows up in chronic self-doubt, self-centered fear, fancied self-sufficiency, and failed self-reliance, as is written in our book. I had no clue to that stuff. I've been going to therapy since I was 9 years old, folks. I've been having problems since I can remember. And the reason I didn't see alcohol as a problem is because when I take a few drinks, it seems to give me the illusion, the impression that all is well in Wayne's World now. And why would I want it? Why would I actually quit drinking if that's the effect produced that I get in my mind? And when I say mind, I'm talking about the soul of man and woman, where the heart of God lives deep down inside. And why would I quit drinking if it performs this magical ability to take me outside of myself? Why in God's name would I quit drinking? There ain't good enough reason in the world. You see, alcohol, the effect produced makes my consequences inconsequential. Does not matter to me. Wife wants to go, I'll help you pack. The Navy says you got to go to treatment. They sent me home instead because I refused. At every turn in my life where I had a chance to do something about my drinking, I had no desire to. I had no want to. I didn't even know why. It's not a conscious thing. It's like what Dr. Harry Tebow and Father Dowling talked about was this spiritual compulsion, this unconscious mental craving, not for the drink, but for the effect produced by the drink. I had no idea that was going on inside me. All the while, I'm trying to find a way to coexist in the world, and I just can't. You know, it's like I was raised in an alcoholic home. No, I wasn't raised. I existed in an alcoholic home. How about that? I didn't mature. I aged. And Dr. Tebow talks about those three characteristics we alcoholics have in common. I didn't say we alcoholics. You get to pick whether you are or not. But he said the characteristics we have in common is we're emotionally sensitive, grandiose, and extremely childish as adults. And that fits me to a T emotionally and mentally, but it doesn't feel like that when I'm taking a few drinks. But raised in an alcoholic home did not make me an alcoholic. Being taken hostage at the age of 9 for 3 days, locked in a basement coal bin, and beaten and raped and tortured by a pedophile, and then dumped out on the street on Monday morning, told if I told anybody they would kill me and my family. That didn't make me alcoholic. Going to Vietnam didn't make me an alcoholic. The torture in that alcoholic home didn't make me an alcoholic. But it did put a definite spin on my personalities. I have to report that. You know, Bill writes in the 12 and 12 that many of these situations discolor our personalities. I came to you with a discolored personality, afraid of everybody and everything, and not even being able to contemplate in my mind why that is. All I know is I want a Budweiser. That's all I know. And later on, I moved on to progressive wines. I don't know if progressive is the right word. Ripple. How many of you remember? I know many of you are old enough to remember Ripple. If you're under 45, you didn't drink it, so don't lie, because they shut that chemical plant down. It doesn't exist anymore. And I like Mad Dog, Deucey Deucey. I like Night Train and Cisco and Thunderbird. Those are my wines of choice on Skid Row. And I was drinking to the bottom that I didn't know I was drinking to. I had no idea, folks. That trauma in my life that I came to AA with darkened my soul. But here's the thing. I believe I was born asthmatic. You know, I'm grateful Bill wrote in How It Works that many of us seem to have been born this way. Not alcoholic, but born with this ism thing, this internal spiritual maladjustment. Is it fetal alcohol syndrome? Who knows? I can't explain to you why I seem to have been born with this broken spirit, but I have all the evidence you can possibly need to prove I was born with a broken spirit. It's laid out in the big book, further codified in the 12 and 12. I have become convinced I was born with a broken spirit. You know, I'm so glad that my sponsor gave me a dictionary when I was brand new. He gave me a Webster's Intercollegiate Dictionary, 1,000+ pages, and he said, start looking up words because you don't know nothing. And he was nicer about it than that, though, I think. And so I had no idea. I just know I was never going to quit drinking, because the only time I feel civilized within myself is when I'm drinking a few Budweisers. And I don't, by the way, I don't want to hurt anybody when I'm drinking. That's another thing too. You know, the classifications that Dr. Silkworth uses in our big book is very interesting to me. And I'm glad he put them in there, because I've had 21 diagnoses in my life. 18 before I got to AA and 3 more when I was 7 years sober. I was given 3 more diagnoses: bipolar, manic depressive with a chemical imbalance. And my favorite one that they gave me, the last one I got at the Watertown Insane Asylum and Francis Mental Health Center, was Wayne Butler is a psychopath with homicidal tendencies. He cannot go unmedicated for the rest of his life. That was my diagnosis at the age of 20, at the age of 34, 7 years sober, that I'm a psychopath with homicidal tendencies, and that I could not be trusted to lead that institution without boatloads of medication to control me and manage me. That was the best science had for me. That was the best diagnosis they could come up with. And I suppose my behavior led to some of that validity in their mind. But here's what I know. I've come to AA. I've stayed sober 45 years and 47, 8, 9 days, something like that, one day at a time. And all those symptoms that I came in here with have subsided. All those symptoms, although a lot of them haven't gone away, they're negligible because of the power of 12 steps and the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you would have told me that when I was new, I would have laughed at you. No, there's no fix for me. You see, that panel of 6 psychiatrists in September of 1977 said to me, we have no fix for you. There's nothing that can fix what's wrong with you. You have to take this medication or we're not going to let you go. So I agreed to take all 9 forms of medication they prescribed for me. I didn't take them. I left the institution. That was in September of 1977. I got sober on November 8th of 1977. Not taking any of the medication and just going further out of my mind, not knowing what's wrong with me. Even the people in the AA meetings where I lived wasn't sure what to think about me. And, you know, some of us are sicker than others. And I am not here trying to out-sick anybody. That's a contest I don't want to win. But I'll tell you what, in the confines of my mind, I was as broken as a human being could be. I had a dark soul. And one of the reasons I had that diagnosis, and I only recently been comfortable enough to talk about this, you know, Dr. Silkworth writes in the characteristics, the classification of drinkers, he says the psychopath drinker. He says the manic depressive drinker. And when I read that, I thought, oh my God, is there hope for me here? It wasn't a conscious thing. It was something that kept me locked into AA a little longer. When I read those 2 things, psychopath type drinker and the manic depressive type drinker, I thought maybe there's hope for me here. And it's like, you know, I came to you with no conscience of anything I've ever done to anybody. I had no compassion, no empathy. I felt nothing. I don't know if you know what it's like, but I held my baby girl in my hands and I felt nothing. I'm not ashamed to report that. It's just a fact. I didn't have the capacity. I just felt absolutely nothing for my daughter. And I knew I should, so I started pretending. I felt something. I was such a fraud, and yet I knew I should feel something. I knew I should feel something, but I don't. When my son was born, I felt nothing. It didn't mean anything to me. And what a sad and tragic thing that is to live like that and not know that. I had to have a drink, folks. I had to go to Larry's Oasis and have me a few Budweisers, because you give me a few Budweisers and all of a sudden I'm concerned about my son and my daughter. All of a sudden I care whether they exist or not. But then when I sober up, all that light turns out. The light goes out again. And I just know there's something irreversible in me. I know there's something about me that cannot be fixed, and I'm hopeless. And I want to tell you, that's an abyss that I don't want to go back to. When when we find in our big book, in our 12 and 12, the many locations where it says, if we don't do this, we might overcome drinking. We have two disciplinarians, God and John Barleycorn. Either go God's way or go the way of John Barleycorn. There's all kinds of spots in the big book in the 12 and 12 that warn me, if I don't do this or that, I may not overcome drinking. And folks, I don't want to drink. I'm a desperation drinker. And I didn't know I was a desperation drinker. I didn't know that I was drinking for the effect. I didn't know intellectually that I was drinking so I could feel like a human being. And the more I drank and the longer I drank, those episodes where I was most violent was from when I stopped drinking and tried not to drink. That's when I was most violent. Then that was when I was getting locked up, is because I had to have that drink, not because I was addicted to ethanol alcohol, but because of that profound effect it was producing in my mind, where I could fit in with society, where I could come and go and do and be as I pleased. I didn't have to be afraid of everything that was in front of me. My God, first time I drank, I met my first wife. She was at the gym. She was at the gym senior party, and I drank a beer because my buddy Tom, gave it to me. And I looked down at the dance floor and I saw me a blue-eyed blonde dancing with some loser. And I'd had just enough beer on to think I could actually go out and dance that I'd never done before. And you know what? We found out that night sex meant two people. I didn't know that either. I was in a retarded class in school. It wasn't special ed. It wasn't remedial ed. It was the retarded class. I still have my high school transcripts. I kept them because right at the bottom of my transcripts, it identifies me as being in the retarded class all 4 years of high school, 9 through 12. And you know what? The Navy still took me. How you like that, Glenn? The Navy still took me when they saw my transcripts. It's good. Probably a good thing Vietnam was going on, or I would have never got in. Who's to say? And so I go along. I start drinking in the Navy again, and all of a sudden, I have these experiences that I just don't understand, and there's no answer for it. And the Navy says, Wayne, you got to go to, or well, not Wayne, he's Petty Officer Butler. You have to go to treatment in Philadelphia. You're an alcoholic. Just because I had a blackout, they consider a blackout an automatic sign you're alcoholic. And I just consider it inconvenient and the inability to remember. So I had those blackouts, and I just didn't understand. And the Navy wanted me to go to treatment. And I said, but I'm not an alcoholic. If I go to treatment, I'm admitting I'm an alcoholic, and I'm not an alcoholic. Why would I lie like that and tell you I'm an alcoholic? And then I go have a Budweiser. And because of my military record, I gave good service. I just couldn't not drink. And when I was in Vietnam, my service was good. I received several accommodations, and medals, and because of that single fact, my captain arranged so I would get an honorable discharge with a medical feature attached. But I was given an honorable discharge because he gave me the choice: go to treatment or go home. We've lost the power of choice, the big book says. We've lost the power of choice when it comes to alcohol. So when he said, I'm giving you a choice, go home or go to treatment. Folks, that's not a real choice. Not when you're powerless over alcohol like I am. And I said, I'll go home. I can't begin to tell you the shame, the utter shame I felt when I walked off that ship with that discharge papers in my hands, knowing that I had just shamed myself. And I just didn't know what to do with that information. It wasn't long before I was actually on Skid Row, folks. You know, most people drink themselves to Skid Row. I moved there. I couldn't trust myself with being around my kids, even though I didn't have that, what you call a normal feeling of affection and attraction with your children. I knew if I didn't go somewhere, I was going to hurt them, because I was doing terrible things, folks. When I was not drinking and I needed to drink, I was doing terrible things in my community, to my family. I was scaring my kids. And I had to get out of there. I had to get out of there before I did something terrible. And I'd like to tell you I'm not selfish and that everything isn't about me, but that wouldn't be true. And so I'm getting out of there because if I do something bad, I'm going to end up institutionalized. That was my whole motivation. I'm not a man of virtue. I'm a man of desperation. And so when I moved out from them kids, I'd like to tell you it was solely because I didn't want to hurt them. But it was because I didn't want to be locked up again in that psych hospital. I didn't want to go through the pain and suffering that was included in there. And I didn't talk about that for a long time either, because for some reason people viewed that with judgment and scorn. And so I kept that secret in AA for a long, long time. So then I go along and I live on Skid Row for 5 years. I lived behind Larry's Oasis in a dumpster that Larry rented for me, a BFI dumpster. I slept in and out of that until wintertime came. And when wintertime came, I ended up going to the Salvation Army or the Rock Island Rescue Mission. They called me a snowbird, Glenn. They said when the snow falls, he flies in for help. And then as soon as spring rolls around, I spring out. And I go back to Larry's Oasis, and I live by myself on Skid Row, in and out of mental institutions, in and out of hopelessness and despair, and not knowing why. And on November 3rd of 1972, I stumbled into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't mean to. I wasn't going to AA. A guy who owns a restaurant, his wife had catered to me the 2 nights before, gave me some free handouts, and let me stay there for a couple of nights. And then this guy, Harvey, he comes in and meets me, and she told me he was going to help me, and he shows up and he shakes my hand. And he got a coin in his hand. I like paper, by the way, but he had a coin in his hand, and I thought it might be, maybe a silver dollar, but it wasn't. It was brass. It had these 2 A's on it. I don't know what those 2 A's represented. And then Harvey says, turn it over, and it's got this God grant me something prayer. And he says, you take this down to 410 16th Street tomorrow about noontime. There's going to be some friends of mine there. You tell them Harvey sent you. They're friends of mine. They're going to help you. He not once mentioned alcohol, Alcoholics Anonymous, or nothing. He led me to believe I might get a pack of Pell Mell tailor-made cigarettes. So I went there anyway. And I went there, I got there, and he told me there'd be a light bulb hanging on a cord, and if that light was on, go in. They expected me. So I went only because I was hungry, and I thought I'd get some cigarettes, and maybe they'd buy me a beer. I had no idea where I was heading that day. But when you're desperate, you'll do desperate things. And I went there. I got there about noontime, saw the entry in the cellar, and the light bulb was on. He said it was on, go in. It wasn't on. It was flickering on and off. He didn't tell me what to do if it was flickering, so I didn't go in. I'm so neurotic, I couldn't go in. I'm out on the sidewalk doing alcoholic aerobics like this, trying to get the light bulb to stop flickering. And one old guy walked past me and down the steps and kind of gave me the come along sign. And I thought, I ain't going in there till that light quits flickering. And it just wouldn't quit flickering. And so I went to Larry's Oasis, mooched me some Budweiser's, got oiled up. And now I've been doing some thinking. Folks. They owe me now. I've been through a lot thinking about that light bulb. That light bulb shouldn't have been flickering. And so now I'm heading back there and get what I got coming. And I got there about 8 o'clock that night. And sometimes I think, is it odd or is it God, how God shows up in odd ways? This group called the Moline Group only had 3 meetings a week. And this was the day where they have 2 a day, 1 at noon and 1 at 8 o'clock. The other one is at noon. Had this been any other day, there wouldn't have been a soul there at 8 o'clock when I got down there that night. When I get down there that night, I'm oiled up. They owe me. I've been through a lot thinking about that room, that light bulb. I've been thinking about that light bulb ever since I got to Larry's Oasis. And I went back there, ignored the light bulb, don't care now. I go in and I go running. I go on a quick step through that basement cellar doorway, and it's 5'10"ish. I'm 6'3"ish. I ran right into it. The impact knocked me off of my feet, and I fell flat on my back and slid into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this old buzzer gets out of his chair, stands over me, and gives me the safe sign. And then he growls at me. And he said, slide right in here, you big dummy. We got a wrench to fit every nut that comes in the door. And by the looks of you, it's going to be an adjustable wrench. And then he picked me up off the deck. And he introduced himself. He says, my name's Barney. And then he says, I'm an alcoholic. And I finally got my wind back because the wind was knocked out of me when I hit the deck. And I thought, oh, my God, you poor soul. You're an alcoholic. And now I don't know how many of you have been in therapy. And I'm not putting therapy down. I'm just stating the fact. In all my therapy, what I've learned when that man or woman sits across that desk, when they confide something in you, it's like a sales pitch. They're trying to get me to buy into what they're saying, so I'll give them something back. So when he said I'm an alcoholic, I said, well, I'm ADD. He says, I'll bet you are. And I said, you know what else I am? He said, what's that? I'm OCD. He says, I'll bet you are. And then he says, you know what else I think you might be? He took me by surprise. I thought I won 2 diagnoses to 1. So I said, what's that? He says, I think you might be ODD. Now, folks, in 1977, the DSM-3, they now have the DSM-5, which for those of you who don't know it, that's the diagnostic manual with all the symptoms that psychiatry diagnoses people like me and you. I know for a fact in 1977, there was no diagnosis of ODD. So I asked him, I said, what's that? He said, you are very odd. And then he says, and I'm going to be your sponsor. Now we're getting somewhere because I know what a sponsor does. They pay for everything. I love the idea he's going to be my sponsor. And I want you to folks to know something. That was a misinterpretation of the facts. He was one, in my mind, he was one of the meanest, evil human beings ever put on earth because that guy didn't appear to be afraid of me. Everybody in my hometown was afraid of Insane Wayne. That was my street name, Insane Wayne. And I lived up to it or down to it, depends how you want to look at it. And this guy, for the next 5 years and 4 days, I went to those meetings on a regular basis. Not once did I admit I'm an alcoholic. Barney and people would raise their hand, say, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic. And I would raise my hand and give them one of 18 diagnoses. And they would laugh and clap and say, keep coming back. Folks, I had no desire of any kind to quit drinking. And they just said, you keep coming back. Somehow they figured out I might be alcoholic. And so they didn't want to deny me that chance. They said, you keep coming back, kid. Mainly because I came drunk an awful lot. 5 years and 4 days. And on November 8th of 1977, my sponsor had asked me the night before if I could stay sober all night. And I told him, I can't go the rest of my life without a drink, Barney. He said, no. Can you just go tonight? I said, Barney, I can't go the rest of my life without a drink. Because I know what he's up to. You know, I know about that spiritual trickery they do around here. And he said, can you go till midnight? And I said, any fool can go till midnight, Barney. And so he wanted me to meet him the next day at the noon meeting to help him set up for the meeting. And I said I would. Something about this old man. I've never, you know, in chapter 4, in the bedevilment, says that we are unable to form a true partnership with another human being. Folks, I've got 5 kids. I had no true partnership with my kids. I had 2 divorced wives. I had no true connection to them. It was all intellectual. It was all transactional. It was all, what can you do for me? What can you give me? What can you do for me? How can you satisfy me? I was just absolutely as self-centered, I believe, as a human being can be. And here's this old man, and I don't know what it was about him, but I was compelled to follow him around like a little puppy. I didn't want to stay sober. I had no desire, but I would always go to that meeting, not to go to AA. I was going there to see this old buzzard that was showing me some kind of kindness that I didn't understand. And his kindness, you know, what was that, Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers, was it Mr. Rogers, who'd say there's 3 ways to be: kind, kind, and kind. And that was Barney. Although I thought he was being mean to me, but what he was doing, he was speaking truth. He was speaking truth to my doubts, to my unknowns, to the certainty that I don't know what's wrong with me. And he knew all about me. He heard all about me in that town. And this is one man that I couldn't scare. I tried to scare him. I tried to keep him back off of me. And there's just no way to keep this old buzzard off of me. I would go back to my dumpster and there'd be a $5 bill in my dumpster. I'd go back to my dumpster after meeting and there'd be a sandwich in there. I'd go back there and there'd be a couple packs of Pell Mell Reds in my dumpster. I wasn't sure who was putting them in my dumpster, but I didn't care. Found out later it was Barney and his tribe. They were looking out after Wayne. And they were doing it anonymously. And I kept coming back, and I kept drinking Budweiser and Ripple and Boone's Farm and whatever I could get in between. And absolutely cast in self-doubt. There's no way there's any hope for me. I was as hopeless as you could. I was engulfed in self-pity. You know, I kept getting diagnosed depressed. And what I learned in my 4th step was it's probably not depression. It's just years and years and years of self-pity. Just thinking about myself. Everything's about myself. And the only time I'm not thinking about myself is when I'm drinking. And I'm drinking and I'm out there. I'll help anybody when I'm drinking. I love everybody when I'm drinking. That's a strange thing, since I could not tell you what the emotion of love feels like. I could not tell you that. I could hold my children in my arms and not feel nothing. It was like I was this void of human existence. And I'm not exaggerating. I got to tell you how lonely that is. You know, I used to say I was never lonely, but I was dying in loneliness, folks. And so I would go drink just so I wouldn't feel that loneliness. And it wasn't that I was trying to quash my feelings. It wasn't an intellectual thing. It was a sensation, an experience that I take a few drinks and something happens to me and I don't understand it. And before I get lost in myself, because I can get hypnotized by my own voice, you know, I have 4 members of my family that all had sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous at one time. And I want to take the last, 15 minutes I got here, and I want to kind of focus on how it works, the solution of that, how Bill brilliantly summed up our entire program in 3 pages. I didn't know how brilliant this was till I was sober quite some time. But the brilliance of the first 3 pages that we read at almost every meeting, how it saved my life, those 3 pages. And I just want to take 3 segments of how it works and paint a picture as to why it brought me to a position where I was willing to take these measures unreservedly, how I became willing to face this desperation I lived in, to become willing to entertain the possibility I may never feel normal feelings like people report that they feel. I may have to accept the fact that I'm a psychopath type alcoholic, but I can't afford to drink. I hate it. I hate being alone by myself, even though because alcohol did what it does. It reversed itself. Do you know what desperation drinking is for me? Is when I don't know I'm seeking the effect and I'm seeking the effect, I'm drinking more and more and more, trying to reproduce that effect that now has betrayed me, and now I'm desperate drinking. I don't even know I'm drinking for the effect, folks. I'm just drinking. I'm seeking that alteration in my personality, the ability for alcohol to take my eyeballs outside of me and turn them around to where I can see other people, places, and things. I was a desperate man, folks, and this desperation was on me, and I wanted to end it. I wanted to commit suicide so bad, but I had enough church in me to understand. At least this was my belief, and probably it's a good thing because it saved my life. But when I was contemplating suicide at 7 years sober, see, I'm going to meetings. I'm sober. I stopped drinking on November 8, 1977. I'm going to meetings. I'm working your steps. I'm sponsoring people. I'm doing everything you can possibly do, and I'm getting worse. My mind and my emotions is getting worse. This depression is killing me sober. I got people in AA telling me to go get medicated. They're telling me to go get medicated, not asking me any questions about my AA work, just telling me to go see a doctor and get medicated. And it's like, I don't tell people to make medication. I don't tell them not to. I'm just telling you my story. I was so lost, even in AA, except for my sponsor. And he told me to ignore all that stuff. He said, you just keep coming to meetings. You keep doing this work. And in 7 years of sobriety, I couldn't take it anymore. I heard one of my sponsees, I couldn't get him to do a 4-step. So I met him after a meeting, and I put my 357 to his head, and I said, work the 4-step or die. Now, my sponsor didn't think that was appropriate, and he took my gun away from me. And by the way, I don't recommend that in sponsorship, but he did, in fact, do his 4-step. I just want to put that out there just for the sake of it. And my sponsor put me on a Greyhound bus and sent me to Los Angeles, California. He says, you go see that crazy Clancy guy out there in Los Angeles. And he bought me a one-way ticket. That should tell you something. It was a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. And I got off that bus, walked over to the Midnight Mission, walked in and met Clancy for the second time. And he put me in his backyard. He put me in the Pacific group. And I got to meet alcoholics of my description. I learned I'm not the only one like this. I thought I was the only one that felt the way I felt, acted the way I've acted without a drink in my body. And I was in a backyard with 100 people just like me, dark and negative, substituting negative for positive thinking, living in the dark and negative side of their natures. Here's a backyard full of those types, and yet they seem happy. They seem to be happy with each other. Something seems to be changed in them. And I got one more time, I got more hope. I thought maybe this could happen for me. And I want to share this. I'm a student of the Big Book. I love our Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a recovered Big Book thumper. What that means is I'm now a Big Book enthusiast, which means I don't hit newcomers in the head with my Big Book when they don't behave, if you know what I mean. And I love this book. And I've heard how it works read thousands of times, folks, thousands of times. And sometimes new things jump out at me all the time because, you can only hear what you can hear when you can hear it. And I have 4 members of my family that all got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. They all had sobriety at one time, starting with my father, who had several more years of sobriety than me. He'd come to this program and he'd gotten sober. My father by his own hand, was an alcoholic, raising his hand in AA. He drove truck out of Chicago, Illinois. He was a Teamster Union steward in Chicago. He worked for a guy named Jimmy Hoffa. My dad was a tough guy. He was one of those guys that he's strapped at all times. He'd fight at the drop of a hat. He was just a tough guy. And he would take it out on my mom. He would take it out on us. And he just hated life, hated himself. And the only way he could live it, I guess, was that way. And he ended up getting sober, and I didn't know it. And he had several years of sobriety when he picked up a drink on Thanksgiving 1977. I was there for the first time. I was around my dad. And my dad said they had this new beer that came out in 1977 called Miller Lite. And my dad looked at me on Thanksgiving Day and he said, surely, Wayne, that kind of beer can't hurt you and me. Do you have any idea how bad I want to have a beer with a man that wouldn't even talk to me, that shunned me as his child? You see, when I was 10 years old, I wrote what we now know as a sonnet. I write poetry. Not very manly is what I was told back then. But I wrote this sonnet about what happened to me in the coal bin of that pedophile's house. I wrote a sonnet about what happened to me as a kid. I didn't know that's what it was. I just was writing about it. And my dad found that, and he almost beat me to death the next day. He says, "We'll have no faggots in this house." I'm not trying to make my dad look bad. My dad was an alcoholic, and he was in his illness at the time. And so I was able to forgive him because our book tells me I want forgiveness. And here's my dad, an admitted alcoholic. And so I'm thinking maybe we can have some kind of relationship. I didn't feel a connection to my dad. How could I possibly have a connection to my dad? But I wanted to have one. And that commercial came on, and when my dad said, "Surely, Wayne, that kind of beer can't hurt you and me," I said, "Surely not. I want to have a beer with my dad. I'm going to have a beer with my dad." But I want to tell you the power of sponsorship. You know, the book talks about at some time or another, many of us are going to have that moment where we have no mental defense against first drink. That defense must come from a higher power. You know, I did not know that spiritual defense could be your sponsor. I didn't know that spiritual defense could be disciplines in AA. I didn't know that power could be in the things that you got me doing. But here's what happened. For 15 mornings and 14 nights, I've been doing what my sponsor said. I called him every morning, told him I asked for help, made my bed, told him what meeting I was going to go to and what my plan was for the day. And he had me call him every night before I went to bed, tell him that I thank God for helping me stay sober, then thank AA for keeping me sober, and review my day. I did that for 15 mornings and 14 nights, and thank God I did. Because when my dad said, "Let's go get a 12-pack," and we went and got a 12-pack and came home and he drank one, I was going to drink mine, the thought went off in my head, call Barney. You see, it was right there on the tip of my head because I've been doing it every day for 15 days. So it was on the tip of my head. Call your sponsor, Wayne. And so I asked my dad if it was okay if I called my sponsor before I drank. And my dad said, "Go ahead," as he drank down his second beer. Now, here's a man who hasn't had a drink for several years. And I don't know if you ever heard a human being die and how they take that last breath and they let that exhaust out. That's what happened with my dad. When he guzzled down that first can of beer, it was like he let out this visceral, non-voiced scream. Finally. I opened up my can of beer. That's when I asked Barney if I asked my dad if I could call Barney. So I did. And I called him. I called Barney. He was getting ready to sit down to Thanksgiving dinner with his kids who flew in from the East Coast. Just for this one day, they flew in. And I said, "Barney, I'm with my dad. He's having a beer. I want to have one with him. Is that okay?" Now, that's a yes or no question if you ask me. He says, "I'll be right over." And then he hung up. And there were no cell phones or social media. There's no way to, it's like in those days, if you make a phone call from a landline, the landline, you millennials may not know what that is. When you make a phone call from one landline to another, it will ring for a year if they don't answer it or I don't disconnect it. So while I'm letting it ring, he's coming over to my dad's house. Didn't know where my dad lived. I want to tell you something about my sponsor. He walked in there and saw my dad was drinking, ignored him. He said he could tell by the look on my grip I had on the beer. I hadn't drank it yet. And he says, "Come with me. Let's go for a ride." Folks, I want to tell you something. My inclination was to stay there and have a drink with my dad. But Barney said, "Let's go for a ride." So I went for a ride with Barney. I left that beer behind out of respect for him. And we drove around for an hour. And Barney Mandela'd me. You know what I mean by Mandela'd me? In 1992, I believe it was, Mandela went to Africa and was given a speech. And he said to the Africans, he says, "I could speak to you in English. I would reach your head and you would understand me. But if I speak to you in Afrikaan, I will bypass your head and go right to your heart and you will feel me. So I shall speak in Afrikaan." And that's what Barney did to me. He drove me around talking about himself, for God's sake. I was okay with it for a few minutes, but I'm wondering when he's going to get around to my dilemma with my dad. Talks about himself, talks about how much he loves AA, and then he outright lied to me, and he said, "I even love you, dummy." Now, I figure they teach him that stuff in sponsor school to try to soften you up for the sales pitch. Drives me around, he's telling him about his heartbreak, how his wife died, how he sat in his rocking chair watching the TV screen after. Back in those days, we only had 3 channels, folks. How many of you remember those days? 3 channels, black and white, and they all went out at a different time before 1 a.m. And there was this target screen that would come on there. My sponsor called that a polar bear in a snowstorm. He said that's what he did, was he sat and drank a fifth of Kessler's whiskey every night. And he came and joined AA. And he says he loves that. And then he says he loves me. And I didn't believe that. I didn't know what to think about that, but whatever he wants to say. And then he took me back to my dad's house. And he says, look, if you don't drink tonight, I'll pick you up tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock sharp. I'm going to pull around that corner right there, and I'm going to be in your front door at 7 o'clock. It won't be 6:59. It won't be 7:01. And if you're not standing there, I'm going to keep right on driving. But if you're there, I'll pick you up. I'm going to take you to buy you a new set of clothes. We're going to go to an AA convention where I'm going to introduce you to some friends of mine. I don't know why, but I didn't drink that beer with my dad. He drank that entire 12-pack, went and got himself a fifth of Jack Daniels, and he was gone. Died a year and a half later from chronic progressive alcoholism. I was on that front porch when Barney pulled around that corner. I hopped in, and my life began to change. He took me, I thought he was going to JCPenney, but he took me to Salvation Army. That's where he liked to shop for newcomers, because we have a tendency to dress different, but we don't have a tendency to stay sober right away. And he bought me this hideous lime green double knit polyester leisure suit. The only shoes they had that would fit me were these platform shoes. So we got out of it for $1.85. Took me home, let me take a bath in his bathtub, put on those new clothes from Salvation Army. We called it Salvadori's. He said that would go down better. And then he took me to his convention, stood me at the front door, and made me a greeter. I had no idea what a convention. I'm 17 days sober. I have no idea what this is. But there's a guy named Chuck C. who's speaking at this thing, and a guy named Norm Alpy, a guy named Clancy I. and Johnny H., a gal named Dottie Shore from out of Radford Hall in the Valley, and a guy named Tom Brady Jr. Charlotte, North Carolina. You know what they did to me? All 6 of those members of AA that gave up their Thanksgiving weekend to come, my sponsor said they came to share for me. He made that clear to me. He says, this is intensive care for you, kid. And you know what? All 6 of them Mandela'd me. All 6 of them. I didn't hear a thing they were saying intellectually. But I want to tell you something. I didn't know till later that every one of them stung something inside of me and brought some life to me and made it possible for me to stay. Made it possible for me to think that maybe they actually did care about me. Maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe one day, just maybe, it's possible that maybe one day I will feel those emotions that people talk about. This stuff that's so deeply embedded in me. This hatred, this feeling of being alone in the world, and I know I can't drink safely anymore. So I'm in that damnable spot that at 7 years of sobriety I couldn't outrun anymore. And I thought there's no hope for me. So I put that gun in my mouth after I went home after that meeting. And I couldn't kill myself, Glenn, because I realized, I remember what they said in church. Because I wanted to go home and be with God, because there's all peace. There's no more hatred, no more gossip, no more character assassination, no more bullying. It's all just peace and quiet. I wanted to go home. But then I remembered my Sunday school. If I commit suicide, I don't get to go home. And I want to tell you something. I was my most dangerous in that 15 minutes. When I realized I'm stuck here with you, and that and I can't drink, because I know for some reason I can't drink safely. So I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. I can't drink safely and I can't not drink. I need a solution. 7 years sober. Clancy gets a hold of me, and thank God for Clancy. Thank God he's the man he was. Because I opened up to him, and I told him, I said, Clancy, I don't think I can live in this world. And he gave me hope. He says, I don't know if you'll ever come out of that, kid. He said, but if you keep doing what we do here, one day at a time, he says, you may be able to step your way out of that abyss you're in. Maybe, just possibly, you'll be free. And I want you guys to know something. That came to pass. Somewhere during the last 45 years, one day at a time, somewhere along the line, the depth and weight of AA got me. This 3-legged stool, recovery, unity, and service. These 3 phases of AA development: desperation, restoration, and transformation. Those 12 steps that took me from the madness of my mind and eventually restored me, eventually put me in a position where I believed that maybe I could recover too. That not only would I not drink, but maybe I could live in peace without drinking. And maybe, just maybe one day, not only would I demand love for me, but I would feel some for other people. And you know, my sponsor had me sponsoring people, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't care about them, Glenn. I didn't care if they drank or not. I only cared whether I stayed sober or not. And it's like, he made me sponsor these people, literally. The first guy I sponsored, he was so drunk he couldn't stand up. So I picked him up. But the rest of them, he sent to me, making me sponsor. I had no idea that he knew that as a psychopath type alcoholic, that the only thing that was going to save me is if I gave myself up completely to this simple program. And one day at a time, little by little, surely, not swiftly, but surely, I continued to stay in this thing. And after 6 months of being out there with Clancy, he said, you need to go home and straighten your life out back there. He says, but I believe you can do this. I believe you can stay sober one day at a time. And he says, I believe you can be restored to sanity. And that little bit of hope he gave me was more hope than I've ever heard before. Other people have tried to give me hope, but you know, in how it works, Bill writes part B, that probably no human power can relieve us of our alcoholism. Folks, I got to tell you, the human powers of medicine, psychiatry, psychology, sociology, theology, and pharmacology all tried valiantly to relieve me of my alcoholism, but they failed miserably. They couldn't relieve me of my alcoholism. I didn't know why then, but I know why now. Because, and I'm not badgering science or medicine or religion, but you know what? They don't have the capacity to study one simple thing. They don't have the capacity to study the spiritual malady. And here we don't study the spiritual malady either. We experience it. We experience the spiritual solution for a spiritual malady. And who would know that that would mean sponsoring people? Who would know that would mean working steps 10, 11, and 12 as a way of life, as a daily affair to bring me into my right mind, the way God intended me to be, to restore me to God's original design of which I've never known. And that's that restoration phase that Chuck C would often talk about, where from steps 4 through 9, get to clear away all that stuff that God didn't intend for me, and I get to be an open sheet, a clean sheet. I get to have a clean slate, and maybe I can actually get to a point where I don't hurt no other human beings, and that I won't need to take a drink because I'm desperate. I know I can't drink safely, and I need an answer. And I found that solution not just in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's only 1/3. That's only one leg of a three-legged stool. You know, a three-legged stool can't stand on one leg. So it's not just about the 12 steps. The other leg, unity, the meetings, the fellowship. That's the second leg of the stool. And the third leg is service, the traditions, the concepts, those 3 legs of the stool. And you know what? The stool can't stand if they're not connected to something. And the seat, according to Reverend Sam Shoemaker, the seat of that 3-legged stool is God, the soul. And if that 3-legged stool, if I can practice that 3-legged stool, not only have I overcome drinking, but like the big book promises, our 2 goals of AA can come true. I can experience victory over alcohol, and I can find freedom from the bondage of self. I have found those 2 goals. I meet them on a daily basis. And Glenn, I'm going to close with this. I never knew the day would ever come where I would be able to live as a citizen, free of the bondage of my mind, free of the bondage of other people's minds, by the way, free of the controls of other people, places, and things, to not need a drink. And, you know, it was 10 years ago, Glenn, it was 10 years ago when I had this experience where my kids and I had gotten back together again. And I believe this is what happened through sponsorship. I had this feeling of affection for my own children. And I have this deep affection for my sponsees and their sponsees. And what I now know is I've been restored to the state that I think God wanted me to be in. And as I continue to practice steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis, I believe I can stay away from the first drink. I won't need the first drink. And I will live in this peace of mind that I live in quite a bit of the time, Glenn. Thanks for having me share. I'll leave it there.